Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the April 2023 Council Agenda Briefing. We acknowledge and pay our respects to the traditional custodians of this land, the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, and their elders past and present. I would like to advise everyone that the audio of this meeting is being live streamed to YouTube. I request everyone to please turn off your mobile phones. I remind you that audio recording of the meeting proceedings and photography within the chamber is prohibited unless prior approval has been granted, and councillors and city officers are reminded to disclose any declarations of financial interests and interests affecting impartiality and are requested to activate their microphones when addressing the meeting. So, with that, we move on to item 1, welcome. Item 1 is the declaration of opening. I declare this meeting open at 1 minute past 6 p.m. Councillor Glenn Cridland has requested to attend tonight's meeting via telephone. So, in accordance with Regulation 14C and 14C of the Local Government Administration Regulations 1996, I've authorised Councillor Cridland to attend the meeting by electronic means. Councillor Cridland, in accordance with Regulation 14C Sub-Regulation 5 of the Local Government Administration Regulations 1996, can you maintain confidentiality during the meeting and when the meeting goes behind closed doors?
I certainly can, Mr Mayor.
Thank you very much, Councillor Cridland. I do have another announcement to make tonight. Bernadine Tucker is leaving us, unfortunately. She's joining the town of Victoria Park with effect from next week. So we wish Ms Tucker well in her new role, and we thank her for her service to the city for about 4 years now. So thank you, Ms Tucker. I'm also pleased to announce that Tony Fry has been promoted to Governance Manager, and congratulations and welcome to the role, Ms Fry. So, items for council. Agenda items 2, 3, 6, 7, 8.1, 8.2, 9, 11, 13 and 14 will be dealt with at the ordinary council meeting to be held 18 April 2023. And that brings us to item 4, which is attendance. Item 4.1 is apologies. There are no apologies this evening. Item 4.2 is approved leaves of absence. And we have Councillor Ken Manolis, who has an approved leave of absence for the period of 28 March 2023 to 30 April 2023 inclusive. And Councillor Stephen Russell has an approved leave of absence for the period of 8 April 2023 to 16 April 2023 inclusive. Item 5 is declarations of interest. Does anyone have any interest that they wish to declare this evening? Councillor Cridland, any declarations of interest this evening?
None from me, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Moving on to item 8 then, which is presentations. Item 8.3 is deputations. We don't have any deputations this evening, so that's nil. Moving on to item 10, which is draft April reports. So I'll now hand you over to the Chief Executive Officer, Mr Mike Bradford, to take you through the balance of the draft April reports. Mr Bradford.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Item 10.1.1 is Tender 08 of 2022, provision of sound, lighting and staging for the city's communities events. This report considers submissions received from the advertising of Tender 8 of 22 for the sound, lighting and staging services for the city's community events. The report outlines the assessment process used for the evaluation of tenders received and recommends approval of the tender that provides the best value for money and level of service to the city. I note that this report has a confidential attachment as well.
Thank you, Mr Bradford. Councillors, do we have any questions for the administration on this item this evening? Councillor Choi.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I've got a couple of questions on notice that were provided to the city earlier today. The first one is, when was the last tender for the provision of these services and what was the accepted annual amount, please?
Mr Quigley, can I send that one in your direction? Or Ms Shaw? And I should say welcome Ms Shaw to your first, Council agenda briefing at the City of South Perth.
Thank you. Through you, Mr Mayor, to Councillor Choi. So the previous tender for the provision of sound, lighting and staging was approved by Council in December 2018. The total amount for the first year of that contract was $108,000, with the total being $445,000, 133 over the 4-year period.
Thank you through the chair, Ms Shaw, and yes, welcome. My second question is how many community events per annum requiring the provision of these services does this tender cover?
Ms Shaw.
Thank you through you again, Mr Mayor. So on this occasion, there were 6 community events that were used to determine the estimated cost of the tender. However, it is noted that it would be through subsequent budget processes as determined by council as to the actual amount of community events to determine the total tender contract costs.
Any other questions for the administration on this item this evening, folks? No. And very remiss of me, I would very much like to welcome Ms Donna Shaw, who has joined the city as the new Director of Planning. I'm very pleased to have Ms Shaw with us, and welcome to the team. Mr Bradford, next item, please.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Item 10.1.2, Tender 09 of 2022, provision of traffic management for the city's community events. This report considers submissions received from the advertising of Tender 9 of 22 for traffic management services for the city's community events. The report outlines the assessment process used for the evaluation of tenders that were received and recommends approval of the tender that provides the best value for money and level of service to the city. This report also has a confidential attachment.
Thank you, Mr Bradford. Councillors, any questions on this item? Councillor Choi.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Again, a couple of questions that were provided on notice earlier today. The first question is when was the last tender for the provision of these services and what was the accepted annual amount?
Now, Ms Shaw, shall I send that your way?
Yes, please. Thank you, Mr Mayor. The previous tender for the provision of traffic management for the city's community events was also approved by council in December 2018. The total amount over the 4-year period was $502,837.
Thank you through the chair, Director Shaw. My second question is, noting the comments in the officer's report on page 10 of the agenda that the contract will involve design and implementation of traffic management plans for required events, i.e. Australia Day events, Sounds in the Park, concerts, etc. How many community events per annum requiring the provision of these services is the tender based on? And noting that the downgraded Australia Day event this year resulted in minimal traffic management implemented compared to previous years, and the same could be expected for next year.
Ms Shaw.
Thank you through you, Mr Mayor. 6 community events per annum were used to determine the estimated cost of this tender, and it's also noted that the anticipated cost provided in the tender reflects the reduced scale of those community events. Larger scale community events that are facilitated within neighbouring local governments were not included in the estimated costs for the traffic management tender in this instance.
Thank you, Ms Shaw. Any further questions, Councillor Choi?
Yes, thank you through the chair again, Director Shaw, and you've already answered the second part of my question, but just for the benefit of the other councillors, elected members, have the Town of Victoria Park events such as the annual Perth four-wheel drive and adventure show, various expos and concerts held at neighbouring McCallum Park and or Taylor Reserve, which vehicle access to parking and entry is usually via Way Road, Mill Point Road and Elm Street, South Perth, been included in the schedule of works under this tender? And if not, can it be, please? Since these events impact local traffic flow, residential amenity and access within the city of South Perth and has been the subject of numerous complaints over the years from the city's local residents and ratepayers.
Ms Shaw.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. In terms of whether the costs have been included within this tender, they have not. In respect to whether the city provides advice to neighbouring local governments in terms of traffic management plans for larger scale events, we do, and we have a strong relationship with the Town of Victoria Park to provide input in that respect. It's also noted that it's open to council to provide a budget allocation through subsequent budget processes for a provision towards contributing towards traffic management plans for larger scale events where they intersect on the boundary.
Thank you, Ms Shaw. Councillors, any further questions for the administration on this item this evening? Councillor Cridland?
None from me, thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Mr Bradford, next item, please.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Item 10.3.1, proposed 6 four-storey group dwellings, lot 277, number 120 Mary Street, Como. This report considers an application for development approval for 6 four-storey group dwellings on lot 277, number 120 Mary Street, Como. The item is referred to council as the building height exceeds 9 metres and therefore falls outside of the delegation to officers. The building height of the proposed development complies with the maximum height prescribed by the Canning Bridge Activity Centre Plan. For the reasons outlined in the report, it is recommended the application be approved, subject to conditions.
Thank you, Mr Bradford. Councillors, do we have any questions for the administration on this item this evening? Councillor Brenda Abrandis.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm quite comfortable with the compliance with regard to the development, and obviously it's quite large scale. Just a little bit concerned about the landscaping requirements. So we've got obviously identified tree shrubs relatively small, not gaining a maximum height. So I'm just sort of concerned about, could we have achieved a greater outcome with regard to the landscaping to have more substantial trees included in this development?
Ms Shaw or Ms Mullen? Ms Mullen.
Thank you, through the chair. Thank you for the question. We are seeking for a landscaping plan for the development and an arborist report to see if we can actually retain any of the trees that are existing on the site. As you'll see from the fairly limited open space, it is difficult to have more mature trees, and there is a limitation as to what would actually grow on those particular sites. But there are 12 small trees proposed, which is in lieu of the larger trees that you would normally expect. But the arborist report may result in larger, more mature trees being retained.
Councillor Brenda Abrandis.
Thank you, Ms Mellon. Just a further question with regard to the existing trees that are actually on the site. So what sort of size and scale are those trees, and are you aware of the varieties that are currently there at the moment?
Ms Mullen.
Thank you, through the chair. I'm not actually aware of the variety at the moment. I mean, a number of them do appear to be quite substantial, which is why we actually asked for the arborist report, and then we'll make an assessment based on that and see whether any can actually be retained as part of the landscaping plan for the development.
Councillors, any further questions on this item this evening? Councillor Cridland.
Yes, Mr Mayor, I had a couple of questions.
Fire away.
They're to Ms Mullen, and they relate to why this matter is before us. Is it before us as a council because it's a group dwelling, or is it because they've opted to have the council determine it rather than a JDAP? That's the first question. And the second question is, is Ms Mullen aware of a similarly negative view by the design review panel of the actual design of a property, of an application to this one? Because it seems to me that the design review panel has taken quite a negative view of the, I guess, the streetscape. It's not really a streetscape, given that you're going down an entryway, but the appearance of the buildings to someone walking down the entry lane.
Ms Mullen, have you got both of those questions?
Through the chair, I think so. Thank you.
Fire away.
So with regard to the first question, the group dwelling wouldn't go before the JDAP, and it has come before council because of the height limit in the scheme of delegation, although it's compliant with the activity centre plan height limit, because the delegation doesn't permit development over 9 metres to be considered under delegation authority. That's why it's come before council. The second part of the question, I would have to refer specifically to the DRP's comments, but my understanding is that there were comments made that related to the original design, which was subsequently amended. So the DRP's comments overall were supportive of the development and of this particular typology. But I may take that on notice to provide a further response, so I can actually review the actual DRP's comments and give a comprehensive response. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Mullen. Councillors, any further questions for the administration on this item? Councillor Cridland.
Yes, Mr Mayor, and just to assist Ms Mullen, what I was referring to in respect of the design review panel was predominantly the reference by the design review panel to how overwhelming the garage door frontage was, noting that there has been some change, I noted, since the original design.
Ms Mullen?
Thank you for the clarification. Thank you, through the chair. Thank you.
Any further questions, councillors? Councillor Quidland?
No, nothing further from me. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Next item, please, Mr Bradford.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Item 10.3.2, traffic and parking impacts in the Canning Bridge Activity Centre plan area. This report responds to the notice of motion submitted by former councillor Carl Celadon at the September 2022 Ordinary Council meeting in relation to the impact on traffic and parking within the Canning Bridge Activity Centre plan area as a result of recent development approvals.
Councillors, any questions for the administration on this item? Councillor Choi.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Again, this question was provided on notice prior to the meeting. For the sake of clarity, consistency and principles, why is the strict application of the aims of the City's Street Verges Policy P210 that commits to the retention and development of green and leafy streetscapes, including street verges, being proposed for the Canning Bridge Activity Centre plan area only and not for all precinct areas throughout the city, as noted at page 25 of the officer's report? As surely the issue of development applications excluding on-site visitor or other parking provisions and thereby the reliance on free on-street parking is an issue that is and will continue to occur throughout the city, not something new just now for the Canning Bridge area. The York Street South Perth Street Verge approved development application is a recent example.
Should I send that to Ms Mullen or Ms Shaw? Ms Shaw.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. So in terms of the recommendation provided within the report, the notice of motion specifically related to the impact of traffic within the Canning Bridge Activity Centre plan area, and as such the officer recommendation reflected the amendments for that area only. However, the City has no objection to the proposal and modifications to the policy removing reference to any area outside of that. In terms of how any future development application would be assessed outside of the Canning Bridge Activity Centre plan area, it would be open to a future developer to make an application to provide for on-street bays, given that this is provided for in the design principle assessments under State Planning Policy 7.3 Residential Design Codes. In the instance that the City or Council refused an application on basis of non-compliance with the Council policy that had been amended to remove the ability to provide street bays within the verge area, it would be open for the applicant to make an application for review to the State Administrative Tribunal on that basis. So in effect, the City could support modifications to that policy or present modifications to that policy to that effect to Council to consider. However, it would still be open for an applicant to make an application to provide for on-street bays.
Thank you, Ms Shaw. Councillor Choi, another question?
Thank you, through the chair, Director Shaw, and that was very good information to know. So I just wanted to clarify then, so that the ability for the applicant to go to the State Administrative Tribunal, that also applies for the Canning Bridge Activity Centre plans. Even if the policy is amended as such as proposed in the report, that could still be the outcome.
Through you, Mr Mayor, yes, that's correct.
All right. Any Councillor Warland?
Thank you, Mayor. Can we just clarify what the review would entail in terms of what it would consider and then the timing of that?
Ms Shaw.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. So the current policy itself provides generally, it's actually quite silent on whether or not bays are provided within the verge. In terms of the actual activity centre structure plan, it does provide for on-street car parking bays to offset the amount of bays that would otherwise be provided on site, as does the design principles of the R codes. So should Council be of a mind to attempt to ban that, it could include that specific wording within the policy requirements itself, and in the assessment of any subsequent development application, the City would need to have due regard to those requirements. In terms of the review of the policy itself, I would anticipate we could have that undertaken within the next few months and reported back to Council for review and adoption.
Councillor Warland.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Ms Shaw. And would the existing on-street parking situation in that area be considered as part of any policy review?
Ms Shaw.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. My understanding was that the intent was to review any existing bays adjacent to existing developments to see what impact that has on traffic throughout the area. If the view was to extend the ban in effect to other areas within the city, it would more be a consideration on likely impacts on the streetscape in terms of existing vegetation, the capacity within the existing road network to accommodate any shortfalls in car parking as a result of proposed densities, especially in light of the new scheme coming into effect as well. So it would likely be a broad review in terms of road network capacity and on-street bays.
Any further questions? Councillor Choi.
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. Just following up on my last question with regards to Director Shaw's comments about the applicant's ability to go to the State Administrative Tribunal. My understanding is that that's not a relevant planning consideration for council. Is that correct? And if that is correct, that then we shouldn't be casting our minds to that when amending any policies as such as what's being discussed and proposed in the report.
Ms Shaw.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. The ability for an applicant to make an application for a review to the State Administrative Tribunal is not a relevant planning consideration. However, it is a consideration in terms of setting parameters and design criteria for applicants to have regard to when designing their future applications.
Thank you, Ms Shaw. Any further questions, councillors? Councillor Cridland?
Councillor Warland's asked my question, so nothing from me.
All right, thank you. Next item, please, Mr Bradford.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Pardon me. Item 10.4.1, listing of payments March 2023. This report presents to Council a list of accounts paid under delegated authority between 1 and 31 March 2023 for information.
Councillors, any questions for the administration on this item this evening? Councillor Choi.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. And this question was provided on notice prior to the meeting. I note the legal fees for the past month amount to around just under $70,000 compared to around $30,000 for February, $12,000 for January and $30,000 for last December. Can the City please advise why the legal fees for March appears to be much higher than usual and which department, if any, is accruing the most legal costs? And the second part of my question is the City able to do anything to reduce these costs and burden on ratepayers? Thank you.
Should I send that to Mr Adams or Mr Lecoq? Mr Adams.
So, first of all, we could just note that the legal costs amounted to $50,000, not 70. I think there's an amount in there for Ansell Strategic, which is classified as legal expenditure, which amounts to $20,000 that isn't legal expenditure. It's for the advice on the Collier Park Village request for proposal process. Of the $50,000, $28,000 relates to the Pinnacles apartment matter, which is a matter that's been going on for some time. Year to date, that's cost us about $83,000. So the rest relates to the city's direct legal needs. Most of those costs are incurred in relation to council governance matters, contracts, agreements, underground power, prosecutions and legal advice. So there's no department that can be singled out as incurring expenditure for the largest part of, because the largest part of that expenditure serves the needs across a city, so as an organisation, so it's not specific to any one department. Obviously, you know, we're very careful about incurring legal costs, and we only do it where it's absolutely necessary. So, in terms of can we reduce it, we're always looking to reduce it, but I can assure you that these costs that we do incur are only the costs that we deem necessary in making sure that we do everything that we need to with regard to the law.
Thank you, Mr Adams. Councillors, Councillor Brenda Brandis.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just a follow-up on the question from Councillor Choi with regard to the $28,000 worth of legal fees for the Peninsula apartments. Are we able to recover any of that from the strata body corporate at all?
Should I be sending that to... Mr Adams?
So just as point of clarification, it's not Peninsula Apartments, it's the Pinnacles Apartments.
Thank you, Mr Adams. Ms Mullen?
Thank you through the chair. Because the matter is still before the State Administrative Tribunal, it's not really a matter that can be discussed in public.
Thank you, Ms Mullen. Councillors, any further queries in relation to this item this evening? Councillor Cridland?
Nothing from me, thank you, Mr Mayor.
All right, thank you. Next item, please, Mr Bradford.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Item 10.4.2, monthly financial statements, March 2023. The monthly financial statements are provided within the attachments A through I, including a high level of analysis contained in the comments of the report.
Councillors, any questions for the administration on this item this evening? Councillor Brenda Abrandis?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just with regard to the variance analysis, I can't find the exact reference in here, but there was note that the Technology One project, Technology One system implementations had a $197,000 unfavourable variance with regard to that project. Can you just provide a bit of indication as to what that is with regard to and whether that would be recovered just through ongoing system implementation?
Who should I send that to? Mr Adams?
So Mr Lecoq can correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure that particular item says that the variance is due to timing, and in particular one system implementation as part of that timing difference. So it's not a permanent variance from my understanding.
Mr Lecoq, is that correct?
Yeah, just to add through the Mayor to the commentary of Director Adams, that is correct, and it's mainly to do with some of the stages that we've gone live with very recently. So a spike in expenditure there that is well within budget still, but it's all to do with the timing of that expenditure.
Thank you, Mr Adams and Mr Lecoq. Councillors, any further queries on this item this evening? Councillor Cridland?
Nothing from me, thank you.
No, thank you. Okay, well that winds up item 10 then. Item 12 is motions of which previous notice has been given. There are nil this evening. Item 15 is when we would ordinarily close the meeting to the public if there was any need to do so, but there is no need to do so this evening. And item 16 is closure. So I'd like to thank everyone for their attendance and participation this evening. Declare this meeting closed at 6:27 p.m. Thank you all and good night.